There are a lot of different ways to cast on for double knitting. We are going to be using the knitted cast on. If you haven't done that before, it's very simple. We'll go through it. If you have done it before, we're simply going to do 2 strands of yarn held together, because for double knitting, we are going to be casting on pairs of stitches. So tie yourself a slip knot to get started. And then you place on your left needle the slip knot, and you're going to take the right needle and put it into the stitch as if to knit, and then you can tension down that slip knot. So there's your tail, there's your working yarn, you tension it down, and what we are going to do from here on is we're going to knit on stitches to the left needle so we're going to add the stitches to the left needle, just simply knitting them. So wrap the yarn around the needle like you would for knitting, pull up a stitch, but you're going to make it a little bit loose. We're not taking this one off, we're going to be adding stitches. So with that stitch loose, we twist the needle to open up the stitch so that we can slide it on to the left needle. And what you'll do is put the right needle now behind the left needle and tension down. You don't want to yank down really tight, you don't want it to be sloppy loose, but you want it to be just touching the needles together in a bit. Well, get it in focus. Just a little bit of slack in there, not too much. You might have to try this a couple times, because if you do it a little too tight, you'll have a cast on that kind of bunges up, but if you do it too loose, then it'll just be a little bit sloppy from stitch to stitch. But after a couple of tries, it's okay to back up and start over once you get a feel for it. So we're going to go through it again. We have the yarn, or the needles crossed. We take the yarn, wrap it around the right needle, pull up a stitch, twist the needle, and slide that stitch on to the left needle, put the right needle behind, and tension down. That's the knitted cast on. Some people, you will see, will wrap the yarn, pull up the stitch, and then once they put it on the left needle, they take out the right needle and then they tension down. I don't like to do this because it adds an extra step, because now I got to stick the needle back in. But it also, when you tension down on just the one needle, you sometimes have to fight to get that other needle back in. Why bother? Why not just leave it in there? And that also helps to set your tension so that your cast on is not way too tight. So wrap the yarn, pull up a stitch, twist, place it on the left needle, put the right needle behind, and tension down. If you're going to be doing it with your left hand holding the yarn, it's just like knitting stitches, just sticking them on, wrap the yarn, pull up a stitch, twist it, put it on the left needle, and tension down. Sometimes I find with using my left hand I have to wrap the yarn an extra time, because when you're knitting and you're pulling up the stitch, it slides all that tension, or slides more yarn, that when we need to put it back into tension, I might have to really pull my hand away. So fiddle with it, see what works for you. I am a picker, but I typically do this cast on with the right hand just because I find it easier for me, but you do what you would like to do, and that's just fine. Now, we are going to be casting on in pairs, like I said, so let's take a moment to look at our pairs of stitches. We have 2 stitches right there, red and gray, gray and red, and focus. Okay, just making sure it's in focus. So you can see that we have these pairs of stitches. It doesn't matter when you're casting on whether the gray one comes first or the red one comes first. We're going to sort that out later. So you'll cast on as many stitches as the project calls for, and then we'll come back and work our way back across, beginning double knitting and sorting out the stitch colors. But we're working these in pairs in the cast on. A very similar cast on to this that I've seen is doing the knitted part, but they transfer the stitch from right to left like that. So if you've done the knitted cast on that way, again, it's not going to be too much of a difference, but I find that it creates an extra step by then having to stick the needle back in. So I like to do the knitted cast on where I wrap the yarn, pull up the stitch, slide it on and put the other needle behind, and I'm ready to go.